Welcome to TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, June 5th, and we have a great show for you today. We have Executive Director of the Brookline Housing Authority, Ben Stone, in an interview filmed last week. That'll come after the flip, but of course, first we begin with the news. After months of working alongside President Trump, billionaire Elon Musk seems to have broken with the president by declaring H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, quote, disgusting and bankrupting America, end quote. Last night, tariffs on aluminum and steel were doubled to 50%, affecting allies such as Canada and Great Britain and, of course, Americans. Earlier this week, the Trump administration rolled back Biden-era guidance that hospitals were required to provide emergency abortions to women whose health was in danger. A report filed by the Massachusetts Biotechnology Education Foundation estimated that the state had 143,000 jobs in 2024, essentially unchanged from 2023. Wildfire smoke from Canada is expected to drift into Massachusetts air over the next couple of days, causing smokier skies. The Boston Public Health Commission released data showing a 38% decrease in opioid deaths in Boston in 2024, the lowest numbers since 2015. The town of Brookline has received a $500,000 grant to install on-street electric vehicle charging stations. The town is expecting to install 4 to 10 charging ports by the end of 2026. Last week, Brookline Town Meeting passed several new bylaws, including banning foie gras and updates to the accommodation process for residents with disabilities. A community refrigerator located on Station Street has been temporarily removed after the town's health department received an uptick in complaints about its cleanliness, pests, and apparent food safety. That's the news for today. I want you to stay tuned for the flip side, where we'll air an interview recorded just last week with Brookline Housing Authority Executive Director Ben Stone. So stay tuned. And we're back here on TV with me, State Representative Tommy Vitolo, only on Brookline Interactive Group. And as promised, today we have Executive Director of the Brookline Housing Authority, Ben Stone. Ben, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know, we want to get right into it. We've only got 25 minutes, and obviously the Brookline Housing Authority is so important to so many people in Brookline. But you're relatively new to the job. A lot of folks don't know you. So, what have you been doing your whole life?
Great question. Well, what have I been doing with my life? Well, I'm finishing up my second month at the Brookline Housing Authority. I think this is my 8th week, and I told people after this week I'll stop counting it in weeks as I get more settled in. But I'm coming to the Brookline Housing Authority after over 10 years working for the Commonwealth, and the last 7 years at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable, the State Housing Agency, UHLC, where I was various roles in the oversight and funding of public housing and the state voucher programs. Where my last job there was Undersecretary of Public Housing and Rental Assistance. Word about myself, I live in Dorchester, my wife and 2 kids. And I didn't come to housing at the start of my career, but as I've grown at the state, become really passionate about housing and the need to address the lack of housing and the housing crisis here in Massachusetts.
So you're settling in, pretty soon you'll be measuring in months, not weeks. As you said, I like that. It's, you'll advance to the toddler stage of your
Exactly.
career. At least not of your career, but certainly of your job at BHA. I know you've got Community Day coming up. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we're really excited about Community Day. We have a great head of resident services, Danielle Mandola, who's been organizing it along with a whole bunch of staff, but we're going to be having it at our 22 High Street property down by the firehouse. And it's an opportunity for our residents to come out, meet our staff, have a fun day. There'll be a lot of partners from the town and Brookline nonprofits joining, which we're really excited about. I think we're gonna have a cookout, a bounce house, I think a DJ, all that fun stuff, just so people can, celebrate the spring and, the BHA community. For me, especially, it's exciting because it's a chance for me to meet even more of our residents and our partners who I haven't had the chance to meet yet.
And really, that's just one example of the kind of resident services you provide for folks who are maybe are new to BHA or don't know BHA as well. Give us a broader sense of the kind of services that BHA provides its residents.
Yeah, thank you. Because one thing that really struck me even before I joined the BHA, and even more since I have, is people I know, housing authorities don't have the most robust funding. Often they operate on a shoestring, but BHA, through creativity of various funding models, support from the town, and it's just commitment to resident services, is a much more robust resident services program than I've seen at, I think, any other housing authority. And we have that in a variety of ways. At our senior sites, we have a contract with Heber Senior Life to provide really robust services, including resident services with case management, fitness classes. They have a wellness nurse who goes around to the different properties. They host coffee hours, bingo nights, various ways to bring the residents together and connect them with services, medical care, all this stuff that people really need. And that's huge. And on our family sites, we have a great contract with Brookline Center for Community Mental Health. I'm sorry if I butchered that acronym or the title. But they also, similarly, they provide services to residents, both events, case management. And we also have, through our in-house staff, have a self-sufficiency program. This one we're really proud of. It's through a state grant, but it helps our state residents, and we're expanding it to federal this year, I think with some town support. It helps them with economic mobility. So in public housing or rental vouchers, residents typically pay 30% of their income, which means that for every dollar additional they make, they're supposed to pay an additional 30 cents in rent. But with the self-sufficiency program, they both get coaching to help them towards their educational or economic goals. But also, if they earn more money, it goes, instead of going to the housing authority, it goes into an account called escrow account that helps them start generating savings. And when they're done with the program, they graduate, they have those savings to take towards their next goal, whether it's home ownership, which is difficult, for their education, whatever they need. We're really happy with that because it gives a little bit of an upward economic path for our residents.
Love it. I want to talk pivot really a little bit into BHA as a construction agency, as an agency that's doing work on buildings themselves. And I know you have a couple of projects that are underway or recently completed, different parts of town. Give us a sense of those projects.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky to come in. The BHA has done a whole lot, both in redeveloping, repositioning its properties, doing complete rehabs costing literally tens of millions of dollars, but doing really transformative work, as well as keeping good upkeep of the remaining public housing properties. So we have gone through some projects that people in town might be aware of. We recently completed the really comprehensive rehab of, some people know it as Sussman or 50 Pleasant, the tower across from the library, which now has this nice kind of multicolored cladding on it. So we basically did a complete, almost gut rehab of this, I think, almost 50-year-old high rise to make it, bring it up to modern standards, use all electric equipment for heating and cooling, make it more accessible, improve community space, a beautiful park next door. So that's one example of the work we've done in partnership with the town, the state giving us tax credits. We also, people are probably aware, have a big project going on Marion Street, replacing the old Colonel Floyd apartments, which were, I think, 60 low-rise, two-story senior apartments built in maybe 1960. I'm sorry, I'm still learning all this. But that's going to be a completely new 115 apartment passive house development that we're really excited about and proud of. And that should be starting to welcome residents in early 2026. So that should be hopefully a great addition to Brookline.
And I want to point out that, that building in particular, it's for seniors, and folks are expected to climb a flight of stairs in many cases to get to their apartment. That's sort of just outright, under modern standards, absurd. And I also want to recognize that the neighborhood, I think, was really accepting of the idea of going taller to allow for some green space and allow for more units and more economically constructed units, a little lower price. Vertical allows for that. And I thought it was really a nice example of, the neighborhood working with BHA to create more units and create better units in a way that made sense for everybody. So I thought that, love those projects. We went on a tour, solar cells on the roof. I mean, the whole bit.
Yeah,
Really,
everything.
really a nice project. Surely you've got maybe some soft, not locked in, not guaranteed, but some ideas on some future projects. What do you think might come next? No, we're not going to hold you to it, but
Well,
what are some of the next projects that might be on the horizon?
well, there are two projects that were already kind of on their way as I joined, so which is great. One that we're really excited about is, and I think we already have our zoning from the town and some pretty substantial funding commitments from the town as well, which we support, which we are really grateful for the rehabilitation of the Walnut High Street property, which is a federal public housing property down on Route 9 by the fire station in Brookline Village. It's planned right now. It's 100 units, 100 apartments, 68 in a high rise, and the rest in these like kind of low rises. The first phase would take down the low rises and build, I think, 96 apartments in a similar fashion to 32 Marion Street. Passive house standard, all new construction, new landscaping. The plan right now is we're going to apply for funding from EOA from the state this fall, and we'll get a sense as that funding progresses when that project will actually take place. I think realistically optimistic guess might be in 2027, but we really don't have control over that. But the design is moving forward. I just saw some concepts of how it might look, with choosing the different color scheme and the cladding and all that, which makes it feel a little bit more real and exciting. So it's a ways off, but I think it's a really exciting project, and again, supports our goals of both modernizing our properties, making them more sustainable, and adding much needed affordable housing units. Because over two phases, and the second phase is quite a ways off, but the second phase would almost double the number of apartments on the site after compared to what's there now.
Now, both for the projects that are recently done or being worked on and for the future ones, what happens to the residents who are living in that building? You don't throw them out on the street. How do you manage all of that?
It's a great question. It's a lot of work goes into it. You have to have a relocation plan signed off on by the residents in the state. Usually we hire a relocation consultant to help with that, help with the residents, through that process. I think it's HOU. Luckily we're not a huge housing authority, but we're a big enough housing authority that we can kind of give people the opportunity to move around within our properties, kind of like that old game Rush Hour, where you move one square to move the other square. That's kind of how it sometimes works, though I'm sure it's not fun for many of our residents to be moved so many, multiple times. So luckily with 32 Marion Street coming online and adding so many units, that will give us a big opportunity for us to move people from Walnut Street there in anticipation of a project happening. So basically they will, and I should note also to your point about new construction, all of our senior properties, or at least the one I'm in, the high rises, the units are really nice now. They've been rehabbed and cozy, but they're cozy. They're about 450 to 500 square feet. With new build, we're able to make 650 square feet, one bedroom apartments. Obviously, it's a lot more space for people. So we're hoping people will welcome the opportunity to transfer if they're eligible to 32 Marion Street.
Now, if someone moves out of a location so you can do the reconstruction, are they stuck in the new place in their new old place, or are they allowed to move into the new space?
They typically have a right to return.
Nice.
Yeah. So like the first priority for the people for moving into 32 Marion will be people who were displaced from Colonel Floyd, or were displaced, asked to transfer for the construction for Colonel Floyd. There's about I think there's about 30 households or so in that category. Yeah.
I'm sure it's a complex sort of engineering problem to figure it all out, but I'm glad to hear that that the residents who were living in the old building have a shot to come back to the new building if they want to. Maybe they
Yeah,
don't
that's
want to
pretty
move again.
They might not. I mean, especially if they move to one of our already rehab senior buildings, they might be happy where they are. But it is all based on choice. There's always priority for returnees, but you don't force people to move back. You may have to require them to leave when it's time for construction, but we always try to make it as collaborative a process as possible.
You mentioned funding. I happen to know at least a little bit how complicated funding affordable housing projects are, right? All of these different um, pots of money, federal money, state money, private equity money, tax credit money. I know it's really complicated. You did mention the town support, and I know there are pots like CDBG and ARPA and CPA, and I can't even keep track of what the heck all the acronyms are. Can you give us a little sense for some of the pots of money, some of the either the operating money or capital money, kind of where it comes from and whether or not it's a sure thing or you're applying? How does it all come together?
For sure. And I'll have to apologize in advance if I bore any of your listeners or viewers because I come from the state, I come from a budget background. So this stuff is kind of, you know, my area, but I understand it's not always the most fun thing to talk about. Just to like really high level, the primary funding for Brookline Housing Authority comes from the federal government for our federal public housing and our housing choice, or better known as Section 8 vouchers. So that's a really important funding source for us. And then we have about 400 units of state aided public housing. And for there, the subsidy comes from the state. So that's like our meat and potatoes. Basic subsidy comes from our state and federal partners. But we're very lucky to be in Brookline and having a town that cares about its housing and has the resources to support it. And that's where we get a lot of additional funding, lets us do more than typical housing authority. So some of those acronyms that you just rattled off. So CPA, the extra property tax surcharge that people support housing and preservation with. We had some of those funds that the town has decided to give us, and those have been used in recent past to support capital projects at our state sites. And the state has a program they call it High Lab, where they'll match local money, they'll give more money than they would have otherwise to incentivize the towns and cities to provide money to housing. And that's been huge for the housing authority because they match up to $2.5 for every dollar of local money. So some of that CPA money, we got $500,000 for the roofs at Egmont by BU. That's leveraging 1.25 million of state capital dollars to do a bigger project to get more roofs done more quickly. So that's huge. CDBG is federal money, but allocated by the town. And we've gotten, similarly, the town's decided to give some of that money to our state properties to let us do more faster and get more state money. And I think also they most recently gave us a small grant to support expanded resident services, the family self-sufficiency program. So a lot of different ways it can be used. Similar in ARPA, other federal money one time, but the town gave us a really big grant there that's letting us do a really big project at our Egmont and Trustman. So basically really diverse types of support. Oh, and I should mention the Affordable Housing Trust too, another way the town supports us. I think that that money, I believe, comes from linkage fees for inclusionary development, subject to the inclusionary development rules, and the housing advisory boards, recommended some really significant contributions there. I think for 32 Marion and now planned for Walnut Street. So basically, we're very lucky and really are grateful for the support from the town and, of course, the legislature. So I'm talking to Representative Vitolo here, who got us a really good, important earmark of state ARPA dollars and is always advocating for us at the state level. So we're fortunate to have this stuff that lets us go above and beyond.
I want to talk a little bit about it's a moving target, right? The federal budget. There's been some votes recently. Who knows what's going to come out at the end? But I want to get a sense for what's on the table from the federal budget with respect to housing. And I'm sure there's a breadth in answers. One question I've already received from several small landlords, sort of mom and pop landlords, is a fear of Section 8 funding evaporating and what that would mean for a landlord with a Section 8 tenant. So can you give us a little bit of a sense, federal budget and how it's going to actually show up in Brookline?
Yeah, great question. And I was actually writing a memo on this when we started this interview. So this is very top of mind. So there's a couple things with Section 8 is actually our biggest single expense and revenue source. So this is really important for us and anybody, and of course the landlords and the residents and voucher holders. So there's two things. There's both like what the current situation is and like what could happen. So let's start with the current situation. The continuing resolution that funds the federal government through September actually had a small increase for the Section 8 program, but it really wasn't enough to keep up with what we're all seeing with, you know, inflation and market rents, program growth. So we're working with HUD right now, as most housing authorities are, at least most housing authorities in Eastern Massachusetts are, where our projected spending's over what HUD said they would give us for this year. It seems like HUD will have the money to cover that difference this year, we hope. So nobody should. Seems like the odds of really severe cuts in this year or something affecting a voucher holder or landlord this year are not likely, but we've had to start tightening our belts, our payment standards, which is the maximum. It's kind of confusing to describe, but it's more or less the maximum amount we'll pay or subsidize. We're going to freeze those at 2024 levels. And we know that's painful for landlords whose costs go up, or voucher holders trying to find a new place, but we're trying to do everything we can to manage to our budget to avoid more difficult actions for everybody. So it's something we're watching really closely. So that's like what's happening right now. And then there's, of course, fears of what will happen next. There's not a secret. The Trump administration put out their kind of like, they call it the skinny budget, and it proposed eliminating Section 8 in public housing, rolling it all together as a block grant to the states. And by the way, cutting adding it all together and then cutting 40% and sending it to the states to figure out. That would obviously be really impactful for Brookline Housing Authority and everybody involved in the housing world. But I'm hopeful that that won't actually materialize once it gets into Congress. And
you were saying year, do you mean calendar year or fiscal year? When we say year in this context.
Well, here's the thing. Another exciting little nuance of housing for your listeners. It really depends what we're talking about. So on Section 8, they tend to look at our funding on a calendar year basis, but the appropriation is usually on a federal fiscal year basis, which is October, September. And of course, the BHA's fiscal year is April to March, and the state's fiscal year is July to June. Yes, just like the states. So, you know, you figure that out. I can't really.
Amazing. Oh,
it depends what you're asking. I know it's not a great answer. It's just the way these programs kind of layer on top of each other.
It's just like another great example of how managing housing is remarkably complex. And that's not the fault of the housing authorities. They're sort of on the receiving end of federal, the sort of mishmash of federal, and then the mishmash of state, and then the mishmash of local, and you are not, and this is sort of an interesting nuance. You're not local government. You are an independent agency.
That's correct. We're an independent agency partner. We're a partner. We're definitely tightly. We hope we are good partners to the town of Brookline, and obviously, the town of Brookline is very important to us. We hope we're important to the town of Brookline, but we are a separate agency. We report to a board. The board selected 3 members by election, 1 appointed by the town, and 1 appointed by the governor. And we're regulated by the state and federal government, but we are sort of neither fish nor fowl. We're kind of our own thing in between all those different entities. So it's important. So partnerships are really important for us.
That's right. Now I want to, I know some people, so it's easy to understand BHA housing that BHA owns and operates, and we can see the buildings, but we also mentioned Section 8. And for folks who don't know, Section 8 is it's called a voucher. It allows people to live in market housing, and the tenant pays some, and the land and the BHA pays some, depending on a formula based on the person's income. Can you give us a sense? I'm not asking for exact numbers. I know it's sort of evolving. You know, how many BHA units are there? How many Section 8 vouchers are there? Are there other kinds of affordable housing? Give us a sense in Brookline for what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Okay, great question. So I think we did the math. We directly house, like in buildings we own and operate, about 3 to 4% of Brookline's population. So we have about 1,000. I'm trying to do the math in my head really quick. Yeah, just under 1,000 units that we own and operate. 400 units of state public housing, 140 units of federal public housing, 300 units of redeveloped housing, and then 115 going up, plus some other bits and bobs of programs. Then we have about 900 Section 8 vouchers that are not in our own properties. So About 200 of those are project-based. Project-based means that the subsidy is connected to the property, and mobile or tenant-based means it's connected to the resident and they can take it somewhere else. Both of their pros and cons. So we have about 200 that are project-based in Brookline, and then about 650 vouchers connected to the tenant, to the person, and I think about another 200 of those in Brookline, and the rest are outside of Brookline. So if you count the Section 8s in Brookline, maybe it's a little bit more than 3 or 4% of the Brookline's population. So it's significant. And I think we're a very large proportion, I don't know the exact amount, of the affordable housing in Brookline. You know, or substantial, I don't want to say the majority, but a large proportion.
And when you say project-based Section 8, is that the result of 40B projects?
I haven't completely gone through it. There's a lot at the villages in Brookline, which I know has been around for a while. Some smaller projects. I think it's a mix. Some may be in 40Bs. What I suspect is that of the 40Bs, we probably have a lot of mobile vouchers in there because they can afford the set aside more affordable units. The Section 8 vouchers can often cover those rents. So I haven't done that analysis, but I imagine we do have vouchers in some of the 40Bs.
Like I said, super complicated, but it's a substantial part of the Brookline community, both BHA properties and Section 8. And I know people see the former. The latter is, in a sense, by design, invisible, right? People are people. We've only got a couple of minutes left. What should I have asked that I didn't?
That's a great question. I guess I would like just to give a shout out, especially since I'm new here. Maybe it's not a question, but something I want to say. Shout out to the Brookline Housing Authority staff. It's made it much easier for me coming in, not just being new to Brookline Housing Authority, but having never worked at a housing authority or in property management directly before, to have a strong, really dedicated team that I can rely on and know that I'm not here to come in and fix anything. I'm here just to make things are going well and just think about next steps and how we navigate the next challenges that we were already talking about. But I did want to give that shout out to my team and the very experienced and active board we have. We have 2 residents and 3 affordable housing professionals, and that's a great mix.
And you've got a website.
We do have a website, brooklinehousing.org.
So folks should check that out. Really first, if they have questions or ideas, you can learn a lot from that website. Folks, I want to thank you for watching another episode of TV on TV only right here on Brookline Interactive Group. We just had a great conversation with Ben Stone, the executive director of the Brookline Housing Authority. And, there's lots of great programming on Big. You should check it all out, and you should come back here next week for another great episode of TV on TV. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.